By the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire appeared unstoppable. From the steppes of Central Asia to the edges of Eastern Europe, its armies shattered states that had stood for centuries. To contemporaries, conquest seemed less a possibility than a law of nature. When Mongol envoys turned south toward Vietnam, few would have predicted difficulty. This was a fragmented realm, poor in horses, divided by court politics, and distant from the great centers of power. Yet expectation and reality soon diverged. Again and again, Mongol campaigns faltered in unfamiliar terrain, against forces that refused decisive battle. This documentary begins with that contradiction. How did a smaller society, lacking scale or resources, resist an empire built on mobility, discipline, and terror? The answer lies not in legend, but in adaptation, patience, and an understanding of war the Mongols did not expect. The Mongol armies succeeded because they rewrote the rules of war. Speed replaced mass. Intelligence replaced guesswork. Long before an invasion, scouts mapped routes, identified factions, and measured fear. When battle came, it came decisively. Cities that resisted were destroyed publicly, ensuring the next submission arrived without a fight. From northern China to Persia and Russes, this logic worked with brutal consistency. Mongol cavalry moved faster than defenders could react, supplied by mobile herds and disciplined command structures. Commanders were promoted for competence, not birth, allowing coordination across vast distances. Most states faced a simple calculation: resist and be annihilated, or submit and survive. This system crushed fortified empires with deeper treasuries, larger populations, and experienced armies. By the standards of 13th century warfare, Vietnam possessed none of the attributes associated with survival. It lacked cavalry, open plains, and unified command. According to imperial precedent, resistance was not courage. At the southern edge of the Mongol world lay Yvit, a kingdom shaped less by expansion than by survival. Its rulers governed through a Confucian court adapted from Chinese models, yet power also rested with a warrior aristocracy hardened by border defense. For centuries, Yvit had existed in the shadow of larger empires, especially China, and this history bred caution, flexibility, and a deep suspicion of foreign domination. Geography reinforced that mindset. The Red River Delta sustained dense populations through wet rice agriculture, binding society to land rather than movement. Beyond it stretched jungles, mountains, and waterways that fractured large armies and rewarded local knowledge. Seasonal monsoons transformed roads into swamps and rivers into weapons. Supply lines could be fed, starved, or drowned at will. This environment was not an obstacle to be overcome, but a system to be mastered. Vietnamese strategy evolved around delay, dispersal, and preservation rather than decisive engagement. Against steppe warfare built on open terrain, speed, and cavalry shock, Yvit offered a battlefield where horses weakened, formations dissolved, and patience mattered more than momentum. This balance between statecraft, landscape, and memory defined survival as policy, not accident, when empires arrived from the north. In 1258, Mongol forces crossed into Yvit, expecting a familiar pattern. Initial encounters seemed to confirm their confidence. Mongol cavalry seized Thonglong, the capital, and the court withdrew south. To imperial commanders, this resembled victories elsewhere. Resistance shattered, authority fled, submission imminent. Yet the withdrawal was deliberate. Vietnamese leaders avoided decisive battle, stripped the countryside of supplies, and dissolved into smaller forces. Cities were abandoned, not defended, denying the invaders both glory and sustenance. Within weeks, heat, disease, and hunger eroded Mongol strength. Supply lines stretched back through hostile terrain, and promised local provisions failed to appear. When Vietnamese forces returned, they struck exhausted units and forced a Mongol retreat. To the invaders, this appeared a temporary setback. They interpreted scorched earth and evasion as signs of weakness, not strategy. Subsequent invasions followed the same rhythm: rapid advance, brief occupation, then withdrawal under pressure. Each time, Mongol commanders reported success, believing collapse delayed, not denied. What they misunderstood was cultural. Ivit did not equate survival with holding cities. Authority rested in people and leadership, not stone walls. By preserving command and refusing annihilation, Vietnam turned retreat into resistance and patience, into a weapon the Mongols struggled to recognize. This misreading would define the wars ahead, compounding error with arrogance until endurance itself became decisive over time, repeatedly. By 1288, the war reached its point of reckoning at the Bach Dang River, a place heavy with historical memory. Vietnamese commanders transformed geography into a weapon, studying tides that reversed twice daily and channels that narrowed under pressure. Beneath the river's surface, iron-tipped wooden stakes were driven into the mud, invisible at high tide. Mongol naval forces advanced confidently, pursuing what appeared to be a retreating enemy. When the tide turned, Vietnamese ships counterattacked, drawing the fleet into the trap. As water receded, hulls shattered against the stakes, formations collapsed, and escape vanished. Fire, arrows, and panic finished what engineering had begun. This was not fortune. It was preparation refined over decades of resistance. The Mongols had been defeated before, but never so comprehensively. Entire fleets were destroyed, commanders killed, supply networks erased. The myth of inevitability broke in a single afternoon. For Ivit, Beichin confirmed that survival could become victory. For the Mongol Empire, it marked the limits of adaptation, revealing that its power could be rendered helpless by patience, intelligence, and terrain mastered intent. Vietnam was never absorbed into the Mongol world. After repeated failures, the empire redirected its strength elsewhere, acknowledging limits without formal defeat. Ivit's survival preserved political autonomy in Southeast Asia and constrained further expansion southward. More broadly, these wars exposed a truth empires often ignore. Power built on speed and fear falters when it cannot adapt. The Mongols misunderstood a society that defined victory as endurance. In that miscalculation, conquest reached its boundary for generations beyond the 13th century.